I have to admit, in the end, I ended up probably being a sort of pony-mad child.
Queen Camilla has always been a figure of interest, but no one saw this coming. For years, the public believed her family life was perfectly ordinary until a shocking DNA test turned everything upside down. Her daughter, Laura, who once stood quietly behind royal events, has now vanished from the spotlight, cutting all ties with her mother after learning the truth about her real father. This revelation didn't just shake their relationship, it has sparked questions about loyalty, identity, and hidden pasts. Why did she walk away? And who is her true father? Join us as we uncover the full story on this. The DNA result that changed everything. When Laura Lopes walked into the clinic earlier this year, she was expecting nothing more than routine medical clearance. Her doctor had suggested a comprehensive genetic screening as part of a new private healthcare initiative for high-profile clients, especially given some minor symptoms that had recently concerned her. While the symptoms turned out to be harmless, the testing was positioned as a smart move, a kind of preemptive checkup for inherited health risks, particularly cancers. It was responsible, thorough, and more than anything, precautionary. But nothing in her life had prepared her for what followed. According to a source close to the situation, the results arrived in stages. The medical portion came first, but it was nothing alarming, mostly good news. But then something unexpected came in. A section of the report, seemingly procedural, flagged a significant genetic inconsistency. At first, it was labeled a possible sample mix-up, yet the wording hinted at something deeper, something that didn't quite add up with what Laura had always known about herself, her family, and her identity. Keep watching, because what Laura found out next shook the royal family to its very core. The report flagged inconsistency, according to medical personnel familiar with the results, related to Laura's paternal DNA. More precisely, it indicated that Andrew Parker Bowles, her legal father, could not be her biological one. That alone might have been dismissed as a clerical error, a lab confusion. But the technology used in her genetic testing was state-of-the-art, cross-verified, and nearly impossible to misread without deliberate tampering. When further checks showed she shared no paternal DNA with her brother Tom, a deeper truth began to unfold. According to some sources, Laura was shaken by this, but determined. She quietly commissioned a second round of testing at a different facility, far from London and the royal gaze. She used a pseudonym, she paid in cash, and she waited in silence for confirmation. When the results arrived, they matched the first exactly. There was no genetic relationship between her and Andrew Parker Bowles. None. This discovery shattered the foundations of Laura's identity. She had grown up believing she was the daughter of Andrew and Camilla, a child raised with a firm understanding of who she was and where she came from. But the test said otherwise, and suddenly she found herself forced to re-examine something she had never questioned: her mother's past. Up until now, Laura had never paid much attention to the intricacies of Camilla's life before her birth. She had been aware, of course, of the long, complicated love story between her mother and King Charles. The world knew that story. It had been dissected in tabloids, documentaries, and books for decades. But now, with a new lens, Laura started studying that story all over again, not as a royal romance, but as a personal investigation into her own origins. Her birth in January 1978 meant that she would have been conceived around April 1977. And according to multiple royal biographers and historians, Camilla and Charles were already deep into a rekindled romantic relationship during that time. This occurred during Camilla's marriage to Andrew, and before Charles's marriage to Diana. And if Laura's conception coincided with the peak of their affair, it changed everything. One historian, speaking anonymously due to the sensitivity of the subject, pointed out that Charles and Camilla's affair, though never publicly acknowledged during its early days, was one of the worst-kept secrets in royal circles. Private diaries, leaked letters, and the infamous Camillagate tapes from the early 90s confirmed what many had long suspected, that the relationship spanned decades, with interruptions, but never a true end. However, What no one had ever suggested, however, was that their affair might have produced a child. Until now. Armed with the DNA evidence and the timeline, Laura reportedly confronted her mother. The meeting took place at Camilla's private residence and, according to multiple sources, it did not go well. Witnesses from the royal security team noted Laura's emotional state as she left, tear-streaked, pale, and visibly shaking. Camilla, meanwhile, cancelled all public engagements for the next 3 days, citing personal reasons. There was no public statement, no clarification, no denial, just silence. And since that confrontation, Laura has reportedly severed all contact with her mother. Letters have been returned unopened, phone calls ignored. Even messages passed through intermediaries have been met with nothing but silence. And with her estrangement has extended beyond Camilla, Laura is said to have distanced herself entirely from the royal household. The internal response within the palace has been swift and severe. According to insiders, this is no longer being treated as a simple family issue. Instead, it's being handled as a matter of national significance, internally categorized as a Category 1 crisis. This is the label used for situations that could fundamentally shake public trust in the monarchy or affect the line of succession. However, what makes this situation so volatile isn't just the personal revelation, it's the timing. Charles's affair with Camilla has always been controversial, especially in the context of his marriage to Princess Diana. While the public has accepted that the relationship spanned decades, the palace has worked hard to establish certain timelines, suggesting that the affair was paused during Charles' early years with Diana. But if Laura is Charles' biological daughter, it implies the affair never stopped and was even deeper and more consequential than previously believed. This has major implications, not just for Charles and Camilla's reputations, but for the monarchy's image as a whole. Palace staff, accustomed to handling scandals, have reportedly mobilized crisis management teams. Legal advisors have contacted the healthcare facilities involved in the testing, demanding reassurances that all data remains private and secure. There's no evidence that information has leaked publicly, yet. But behind the scenes, royal media monitoring has been intensified, with digital algorithms scanning forums, blogs, and even private social media posts for hints that the story might be breaking. Officially, the palace remains silent, but contingency plans are already being drafted, with statements ranging from full denial to vague acknowledgments sitting in drawers and waiting for activation. The goal is simple: get ahead of the narrative before it spirals out of control. But here's the most surprising twist. King Charles himself is reportedly involved in the planning. Normally, in a crisis of this scale, the monarch would be briefed, but not directly involved. Staff would handle the logistics, and the king would be informed only when needed. But in this case, sources claim Charles has taken a personal interest, especially in the part concerning Camilla. And according to insiders, he is desperate to protect her. Another said he had asked for daily updates and personally reviewed some of the prepared statements. His concern is less about himself and more about the impact this could have on his wife, who has already weathered decades of criticism and public judgment. A source indicated that he is aware she would likely become a target and bear public blame, regardless of fairness. Consequently, his actions are aimed at protecting her from this scrutiny. But what about Laura? In the aftermath of the discovery, Laura has reportedly retreated from public life. Friends describe her as disoriented, emotionally drained, and wrestling with questions no one ever expects to face. She has not made any public statements, nor has she granted any interviews. But those close to her say she's exploring her legal rights and options, both as a private citizen and as someone who may carry royal blood. There are also quiet whispers, and so far are unconfirmed, that Laura may be considering a DNA test with Charles himself. But getting such a test would be nearly impossible without his cooperation. And for now, that remains a step too far. Still, the situation is far from over. The DNA revelation has opened a door that cannot be easily closed. It has called into question decades of royal storytelling, decades of public relations work, and decades of assumptions about one of the most controversial love stories in modern monarchy. And perhaps most significantly, it has reminded the world that even in the rarefied halls of royalty, secrets have a way of surfacing, and when they do, the consequences can shake even the most established institutions. The truth behind everything. To truly understand how this story unraveled the way it did, you have to go back, not to the clinic, not to the confrontation, but all the way to the beginning, to the moment when Laura Lopes entered the world. Because the truth is, her life had always been shaped by what others tried to hide. And long before DNA tests and whispered meetings behind palace doors, Laura was already caught in a story much older than she realized. Laura Rose Parker Bowles was born on January 1, 1978, in Swindon, Wiltshire, England, to Camilla Shand and Andrew Parker Bowles. From the start, her life was marked by the complexities of growing up in a family where appearances were crucial and the media was always watching. Her parents' marriage had already been going through its own struggles by the time Laura was born, and this affected the early years of her life in ways she likely didn't fully understand at the time. As a young child, Laura lived with her older brother, Tom, in the countryside. The family was affluent, and their home was one of comfort and stability, but not without tension. Camilla, Laura's mother, had already become well known in social circles, particularly because of her relationship with Charles, the Prince of Wales, even though the public did not yet fully understand the depth of that relationship. While Laura was growing up, she didn't have any clear idea of the ongoing personal dynamics between her parents and other significant figures in their lives, especially not the relationship with Charles. For Laura, her mother was a constant in her life, a loving, guiding figure, though it wasn't always clear how much of her mother's personal struggles affected their home life. Laura's relationship with her mother was close. Camilla, though often involved in charity work and social events, still made time for her children. Laura was often seen attending various public events with her mother, which were a significant part of her childhood. At times, they would be photographed at social gatherings, sometimes attending church services or spending time with other family members. For Laura, this exposure to the world outside of her home and the constant attention of the media must have shaped much of her perspective on the world. Yet there was always a sense that she was trying to keep a low profile, not wanting to be caught up in the drama that surrounded her parents' public lives. Laura's early education began at Haywood Preparatory School in Corsham, a small village in Wiltshire, before she attended St. Mary's School in Shaftesbury, a Catholic girls' boarding school in Dorset. As a young girl, she was described as bright and curious, someone who was academically inclined but who did not seek the limelight. Her early school years were crucial in shaping her independence. Laura was known to be studious and engaged with her studies, often excelling in subjects like history and the arts, but she never seemed to be overly enthusiastic about being in the public eye. Her time at St. Mary's was a formative period in her life. She learned discipline, respect, and how to be responsible for her actions. Being in a boarding school environment gave her a level of independence that she might not have had living at home. It also allowed her to distance herself, to some extent, from the constant media attention that her mother had attracted due to her relationships. Laura was likely aware of her mother's involvement with Charles, but as a young girl, she couldn't have fully understood the nuances of their relationship or its implications on her own life. It was around this time that her mother's relationship with Charles began to shift. The public's curiosity grew, and as a teenager, Laura started hearing more about the Prince of Wales and his relationship with her mother, but much of this was beyond her comprehension. To Laura, Camilla was her mother, and no matter what others thought, she was the person she turned to for support and guidance. While Laura's relationship with her father, Andrew Parker Bowles, was not as public as her relationship with her mother, it still played an important role in her life. Andrew had a military background, and his career had been a source of pride for the family, but he was not as frequently in the public eye as Camilla was. This gave him a quieter and more reserved role in Laura's life. There are not many public accounts of how close Laura was to her father, but it's clear that he was a steady influence on her during her formative years. While her mother was focused on charity work and social events, Andrew was more of a stabilizing force. Laura had a good relationship with him, though it was perhaps less intense than the one she shared with her mother. However, in 1999, when Laura was 21 years old, her parents officially divorced. This was an event that further complicated her perception of family problems. The divorce, although it was somewhat expected given the years of rumors about Camilla's relationship with Charles, was a significant moment in Laura's life. It was clear that the collapse of her parents' marriage did not change the fundamental love between Laura and her mother, but it marked a turning point for Laura as she began to understand the intricacies of adult relationships. After her parents' divorce, Laura went on to study at Oxford Brookes University, where she pursued a degree in history of art. She immersed herself in her studies, spending less time in the spotlight and more time developing her own identity. Her college years were far from glamorous, and she stayed away from the media attention that surrounded her family. The university years gave Laura space to explore her own interests outside of her mother's world of social events and public appearances. She didn't seek to be part of the aristocratic world her mother was a part of, but instead, she focused on her education, hoping to carve out a career for herself in a field she was passionate about, and that was the arts. During this period, Camilla's relationship with Charles deepened, and the media circus surrounding their eventual marriage became unavoidable. As Camilla's public role grew, Laura's life, too, began to change. She was aware of the growing scrutiny that her mother faced as the press began to cover her relationship with the Prince of Wales in more detail. The press speculated about how this would affect Camilla's children, and while Laura kept a relatively low profile, it was hard for her to escape the media's constant attention on her family. Yet she focused on her personal growth and career, seeking to lead a life that was separate from the royal spotlight. At the age of 27, Laura's life took another step forward when she married Harry Marcus George Lopes, a chartered accountant and former Calvin Klein model. The wedding, which took place on May 6, 2006, at St. Cyric's Church in Lacock, Wiltshire, was a private affair, reflecting Laura's preference for privacy and low-key living. She and Harry soon became parents, with their first child, a daughter named Eliza. Born in 2008, the family expanded with the birth of twin sons, Gus and Louis. In 2009, Laura found her place as a mother, and it was clear that her role as a wife and mother became her focus, as distanced herself further from the limelight. Although Laura was close to her mother, the relationship between them evolved as Camilla's public role grew with her marriage to Charles. Laura remained supportive of her mother, attending public events with her, but she preferred to live her own life away from the constant media attention. As an adult, Laura had established her own career in the art world, running a fine art gallery in London and later becoming the director of 11, a contemporary art gallery. She was passionate about art and remained dedicated to her career, always preferring to stay out of the public eye as much as possible. The weight of a mother's past. Although Laura stayed focused on her own life and tried to keep a healthy distance from the public drama that often surrounded her mother, that didn't mean the world left her alone. She never asked to be part of the headlines, yet somehow her name kept coming up, not because of what she did, but because of who her mother was. And this is where things get truly intriguing, because despite all her efforts to avoid the spotlight, Laura still found herself in the middle of the storm. Whether she liked it or not, her mother's relationship with Prince Charles cast a long shadow over her life, and as she grew older, it became harder and harder to stay out of the conversations. Here's the most intriguing part. In the early 1990s, Camilla's relationship with Prince Charles became a subject of intense media scrutiny. The British tabloids were relentless, often portraying Camilla in a negative light. She was labeled as the most hated woman in Britain and was blamed for the breakdown of Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. For Laura, this period was challenging. She was in her early teens, a time when most young people are trying to find their identity and navigate the complexities of adolescence. Instead of enjoying a typical teenage life, Laura had to deal with the repercussions of her mother's public image. Friends, classmates, and even strangers had opinions about her family, and Laura often found herself at the center of conversations she had no control over. But despite the public's harsh judgment, Laura remained close to her mother. There is no public record of any significant quarrels or disagreements between them during this tumultuous time. Camilla was known to be a devoted mother, and Laura valued their relationship deeply. They leaned on each other for support, finding solace in their bond in the midst of all the chaos surrounding them. But as Camilla and Charles's relationship became more public, Laura's life continued to be affected. When Camilla married Prince Charles in 2005, Laura became his stepdaughter, further intertwining her life with the royal family. While this union was a significant event for the monarchy, it also meant that Laura's private life would be subjected to even more public interest. Laura attended her mother's wedding to Prince Charles, and while she supported her mother, she was reportedly wary of the attention the event would bring. According to a friend, she wanted to be abroad when the engagement was announced, but events got ahead of her. She got into a bit of a tiz about it all, and she really doesn't like the attention. But despite her reservations, Laura stood by her mother, even staying with her at Clarence's house the night before the ceremony. However, after the wedding, the media's focus on Laura intensified. She was often referred to as the secret or forgotten step-sister of Prince William and Prince Harry. This label, while perhaps intended to be intriguing, only added to the public's curiosity about her. Laura, however, continued to maintain her privacy, rarely giving interviews or making public appearances. But despite all her efforts to stay out of the limelight, Laura couldn't avoid the occasional media frenzy. In 2023, during King Charles III's coronation, her twin sons, Gus and Louis, served as pages of honor for their grandmother, Queen Camilla. This role brought Laura back into the public eye, albeit briefly, as the media covered the event extensively. Throughout these experiences, Laura remained steadfast in her desire for a normal life. She pursued a career in the arts, working as an art curator and co-founding the 11 Gallery in London. Her professional life allowed her to focus on her passions and maintain a sense of normalcy away from royal affairs. However, despite her efforts to stay out of the spotlight, her connection to the royal family was never far behind. The weight of her mother's past continued to follow her, despite Laura's desire to keep her private life away from public scrutiny. The media's fascination with her mother, Camilla, was a constant backdrop to Laura's own life, though she tried to remain distant from the turmoil surrounding her family. It was a challenge to remain invisible when the royal spotlight never fully left her. The press, eager for new angles and stories, continually sought her out, and whether she liked it or not, she was often pulled into the narrative surrounding her mother's role in the royal family. So, how do you think Laura handled growing up in the shadow of her mother's public life? And do you think she had the right to remain private? Drop it in the comments section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.